Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the All Things Policy podcast. Today, we'll be talking about the new Japanese Prime Minister's rather provocative proposal to form an Asian NATO that includes India. He also suggested a few other proposals, for example, that either US nuclear weapons be based in the region or that the region develop its own. We would be trying to understand these proposals, the background from which these come about, the context in which these were made, and then we'll also discuss what should be India's response to this proposal, what would be in India's interests. I am your host for today, Arindam Goswami. I work as a research analyst at the Takshashila Institution. And to discuss this topic with me today, I have me Yusuf Unjhawala. A mechanical engineer by qualification and a businessman by profession, Yusuf is an adjunct scholar at Takshashila. He has a keen interest in defense, geopolitics, and strategic affairs and has written extensively about these topics. He has also recently written an op-ed on the topic of today's podcast. Welcome, Yusuf.
Thanks, Arindam. Great to be here.
Yeah. So let's dive into the topic of today's podcast. But before we go into the nitty-gritties of the Japanese PM's proposal, could you please maybe give a brief background to this whole episode, right? Could we talk about Japan's pacifist constitution, what that does in terms of restrictions on its defense capabilities, and how that might have influenced this proposal that came from the Japanese PM?
No, this proposal is not coming from its pacifist constitution. I think the Japanese realized the limits of the U.S. imposed constitution, which restricts them to have a defense force. Although it's just terminology, it's a full-fledged armed forces. They have a very strong army, navy, and air force. It's very modern, perhaps the most modern in our region. If you remove the U.S. away, Japanese defense forces are very capable forces with advanced, say, air force, which includes the F-35s. Their navy has advanced submarines. Even they have converted their helicopter carrier to an aircraft carrier. So they are really very capable armed forces. But it was restricted to in terms of just defending itself from an aggression from outside for its own land. This has been redefined into a little more comprehensive, approach where Japanese security also depends on the security of its region, and this is how it was reinterpreted. And the Japanese have been modernizing their armed forces even more, considering how China has been aggressively behaving in its region, not only targeting Japan, which directly does with its island over Senkakus, and also what is happening over the Taiwan Strait across in the last several years. The Chinese sending large number of aircraft and warships and conducting exercises over there, and the real threat of China trying to forcibly take over Taiwan. Chinese action in the South China Sea, especially against the Philippines, how it's literally bullying Philippines every day over there in its own waters, which is contradictory. It's against the UNCLOS ruling. China does not accept that ruling, but that's international law. So all this has been happening, and Japan now wants to play a more proactive role in how it shapes the regional security. And so this is a bit of the background. This was kind of initiated by Shinzo Abe, way back in 2007 when the Quad was formed for the first time. It went into a shell, but then it was revived in 2017. So the Quad is also part of the Japanese larger strategic initiative where it wants to get number of countries into a single platform so that they can talk about the region's security. So this is where it all comes from. So that's a bit of a background.
So as you mentioned, this proposal seems to have been there from quite some time, at least maybe from 2007 or 8, as you mentioned.
That's the Quad, not the Asian NATO.
Right. So what were the immediate triggers? Was it that last month the Chinese warships entered Japanese waters like for the first time, I believe, and its aircrafts also violated Japanese airspace? So was that a trigger, or was it an election time proposal that came about?
I don't think so. See, Japan and NATO have been cooperating. If you just remember, Maybe last year, maybe a couple of years ago, there was a talk about NATO opening an office in Tokyo for closer consultations. So things have been happening. So this is NATO-Japan ties, right? Japan also is invited to NATO talks. So is Australia and South Korea. There is also a concept of NATO plus within the US. And this is not in terms of, getting an alliance together of NATO plus. It's just that more consultations between what you call, like-minded countries, democratic countries who share the interests of, rule of law, keeping the Indo-Pacific open and things like that. So that has been happening. So this is not like an election gimmick or something, because that does not get any returns. I mean, the opinion in Japan itself is largely divided into how its armed forces should be. Although Shinzo Abe to reinterpret the constitution, there are many people who say they would prefer the pacifist constitution. So this is not an electoral thing. This is particularly coming out from the new prime minister, who had previously been the defense minister as well, and having his say as to how he sees this region's security, and that's his word. So it's very serious from Japanese point of view because they are threatened. I mean, they share waters with China, which is threatened every day.
So now let's get into the proposal, right? So what is the proposal? How would an Asian NATO look like? Does the PM provide any specific details of the structure that he had in mind? Who would be its members? So any details about the proposal? Yeah.
Yeah, so he actually wants even some of the Western countries to be part of this Asian NATO. So UK, France included in this formulation, and it includes India. So what he says that Japan and US have close they're treaty partners, but he also says that there are certain quasi alliance partners of Japan, which includes India. And he says that because India is a close strategic ally partner of Japan, we have a reciprocal logistics arrangement with Japan, and we are a quad partners. And we also do exercise Malabar with Japan, Australia, and the US. So Japan considers India as a quasi alliance partner. India may not reciprocate in that kind of a terminology. We would still prefer ourselves to be a very close partner of Japan. We have strategic partners. But Japanese may be thinking different way. So what he thinks is that we can get these like-minded countries together and form an Asian NATO, which is mutual defense. And the basic premise of his was comparing the situation in Ukraine and how the NATO was unable to defend Ukraine because it was not a treaty ally. And he kind of then thinks that Ukraine of today is a Taiwan of tomorrow. It was a kind of a false comparison. We can come to that later, but that is his premise that, if Taiwan is out of any mutual defense treaty, then China will have an incentive to attack it. And if Taiwan was part of an Asian NATO, then it'll deter China from taking it forcibly. So this is where he's come from.
Okay. So in this proposal, what role does Japan envisage for India? Is it just another partner, or is it looking towards India to be one of the leaders in this grouping?
When we look at the Quad, India is very much a key part of it, right? Without India, there is no Indo-Pacific. The whole formulation of Indo-Pacific was coined in India by Shinzo Abe in 2007 when he addressed the parliament. So India is obviously a key member for Japan, not only for Japan, even for the US. I mean, there have been said that India is the linchpin of the Indo-Pacific. But what specific role? I mean, not any specific role. I mean, once you are part of a treaty which says mutual defense, then it means that an attack on one country is going to be considered as an attack on you, and you will take part in all possible ways, including military, putting boots on the ground, contributing towards a war effort to defend the country which has been attacked. That's what Japan is seeing. When you call upon an Asian NATO, that is what it means.
In terms of contributions, like for example, in the current NATO, it's very US heavy, I guess, in terms of military contribution or even probably economic contribution, right? So is that also something that's envisaged for India's role?
No, so what Japan is saying is that the US will continue to be the key. It talks about a hub and spoke arrangement where the Japan US ties are the key, and then all of Japan's other partners play an active role. So when this Asian NATO comes into play, it's US is obviously going to be the key, just like in the original NATO. The US is the key country which kind of carries the weight through. So it's similarly, Japan wants the US to play a similar role in an Asian NATO. And I think some of it is coming from its fears over US's bilateral treaty guarantees, especially after the Trump era, where, Trump was kind of hesitant. They were kind of, Trump even said that Japan should pursue its own nuclear weapons. And so South Koreans have a fear. Say, will the US protect South Korea if there is an attack by, say, North Korea or China? So these are the fears, and what Japan is trying to do, or what this PM has in mind, is to come up with a kind of a formal mechanism which binds all these countries together, and so that there are no ifs and buts, and involve more countries. So right now, Japan is dependent only on the US for its security. So having an Asian NATO where a lot more other countries are involved would kind of broaden the whole scope, and that way it hopes to deter any aggression against it and against Taiwan as well.
So, for the benefit of our listeners, could you maybe detail out a little the Japanese dependence on US for its security? So, are there like troops stationed there? Is there any weapons, military sort of cooperation going on there? And why is there? So, I guess I understand it's the uncertainties of the Trump era administration, but any other reasons that could explain the eroding faith in US deterrence among the Japanese, and how valid is that fear?
So post World War II, US troops have been stationed in an island called Okinawa in southern Japan. It is closer to Taiwan. I think about 20 or 30,000 troops, US troops, I think, are stationed over there. It has also been a source of friction over the years between Japan and the US. Some wanted them out from Okinawa, but now Japan wants to redefine that, and they want a reciprocal troop base. I mean, not Japan. This is the PM's new PM's kind of vision, where Japan and the US are equal in an alliance. Right now, it's not. So he wants to be able to station Japanese troops in Guam, for example, kind of play a bigger and equal role in any alliance. So, yes, US troops are there in Okinawa. The current defense treaty says that the US will defend Japan in case of any aggression. The presence of US troops itself is a deterrent for any regional country trying to attack Japan or looking to attack Japan. And the US has said that it considers Senkakus as part of its treaty with Japan. And if China were to mount an aggression to take the Senkakus Island, the US will come to Japan's defense. This has been stated by the Biden administration, but then the lingering doubts are there in Japan as well as all other US treaty allies as to what would actually happen if there was an aggression. And say in case of say North Korea, which brandishes nuclear weapons every other day, tests its long-range missiles, which are now capable of reaching the United States. The question to ask is, will the United States be ready to say lose Los Angeles and San Francisco to defend Seoul or defend Tokyo? So these are the doubts which are there in the mind of these countries. And that is the reason why there are even calls now for these countries to develop their own nuclear weapons, have their independent deterrent. So this is why the Japanese PM said there should be either US nuclear weapons stationed in Japan, or the countries of this region, which includes Japan and South Korea, to develop their own nuclear weapons. Even there is a talk within South Korea to develop their own nuclear weapons. It's a very dangerous time right now, and we could see proliferation happening. We might see some of our own friends take the step towards acquiring nuclear weapons. And these are the countries which were very critical of India when it conducted the nuclear test in 1998.
Yeah, apparently Japan had imposed sanctions on us also when we probably did the
Yes.
nuclear weapons test, right? So, in that sense, it's a bit of an irony right now.
Yeah.
Also, is there a Russian angle to this fear? I guess, right? Russia helping out North Korea, I guess on various fronts militarily. Does that also? So, I guess Russia has a mutual defense treaty with North Korea, right? And along with supplying it with nuclear and missile know-how, knowledge, right? So, is that also an angle here?
Yes, of course it is. Japan also has its own territorial dispute with Russia, which is continuing. And very recently, Putin traveled to North Korea, and that is when they signed this mutual defense treaty where Russia will come to some kind of help. I mean, it's vaguely worded, but you have to interpret that as Russia will come to assistance of North Korea. And this is a favor which Russia is returning for North Korean help to Russia right now in its war in Ukraine, where it has supplied artillery, missiles, and other ammunition for the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. So obviously, it is a threat for Japan because it may embolden North Korea to mount some kind of aggression which involves Russia.
Can we talk about maybe the benefits and the problems with this proposal, right? We could come to India stance a little bit later, but what are the inherent problems that you see with this proposal? What problems it could cause? Inherently, something that's wrong with this proposal. Yeah.
So the thing is, mutual defense sounds good, where collectively you decide that one country will not be allowed to fall prey to an expansionist power, and big or small, you will come to the defense of that country. So it sounds good on paper. It has worked for NATO, right? It held its peace during the Cold War. The US and the USSR did not go to war, but it obviously led to proxy wars because they did fight. But in the context of the Indo-Pacific, we might see that if there is any talks of an Asian NATO, it might kind of speed up a conflict which may or may not going to happen. We don't know if China is going to take Taiwan by force. But if there was a treaty like that, then we might see China getting provoked to preempt any such defense alliance coming up and use force. So, in the current context, I think that is a threat. Also, Taiwan is not going to be part of an Asian NATO. So, if the Japanese PM says that Taiwan can be defended if it's part of an Asian NATO, if Taiwan decides to be part of an Asian NATO, China is going to mount an aggression probably in a matter of hours or weeks. If it comes to the conclusion that Taiwan is going to be part of an Asian NATO, because it also means that Taiwan is now declaring independence and trying to act like a sovereign country, right? I mean, these are the fears. So far, everything has been kept ambiguous. Taiwan says that it is independent, but does not declare independence formally so as to prevent any Chinese aggression. So, if there was any movement towards a mutual defense, which includes Taiwan, then it's surely going to provoke China to start a war to take Taiwan.
Right. What should be India's stance in this, right? Also, are there any positives out of this proposal for India, or do you see it as a problematic proposal through and through?
I don't know if there are any positives because, like I said, it may start a war. So I don't think there are any other positives for India to look at even of staying outside. So no, I don't see positives. I mean, first, for India, we don't believe in alliances. We don't believe in mutual defense. And given the volatile situation, we don't want to get dragged into any conflict that we don't want to be part of. We sure want Taiwan's independence to continue. We want status quo, basically. How we go about it has to be deliberated. I would say that we should discuss how the status quo is maintained. And this could be in terms of providing diplomatic support to Taiwan. Also, statements in support of Taiwan in terms of maintaining status quo, not using force. Just like how we keep saying today is not an era of war and things like that, right? So you kind of say that we are not going to be we are not going to be neutral in saying all parties and things like that. We are going to be very supportive of Taiwan for the status quo. We're not independence. We're not asking Taiwan to declare independence. We want status quo, basically. We don't want a conflict. Apart from that, we don't want to be part of any such alliances, no, because we don't want to get dragged into a conflict. The reason is India has got its own nuclear weapons. We can deter nuclear aggression against us. We have a large standing army, which is currently in eyeball to eyeball kind of a situation with China. Since 2020, we have had bloodshed on the border for the first time in several decades. We don't have good ties with China right now. But even having said that, we don't want to be in any kind of a mutual defense pact because we can take care of ourselves. Sure, we will need assistance from other countries, especially the United States, when it comes to, say, intelligence, providing intelligence, what's happening across the Himalayan front, what China is doing, how it's preparing, or its logistics lines and things like that, which can help us with some kind of targeting information and things like that. Also, we require a lot of ammunition, maybe weapons, if there is a protracted war. But beyond that, we don't want any boots on the ground we don't want, say, US or Japanese troops being deployed in the Himalayas to fight China. We don't want that to happen. Similarly, we don't want to put boots on the ground in Taiwan or in Japan or anywhere to fend off Chinese aggression. But short of that, yeah, we can participate in defense of these countries by, say, logistic support, by supplying ammunition, weapons, and also be part of economic measures which the Western countries, Japan, and other countries take against China to just like how it has happened against Russia, right? So I don't think we should be neutral in that regard. So my position is that we should not be neutral in that regard, as how we have been against, or rather, in this war between Ukraine and Russia, where we are saying that today is not an era of war. Yes, we are on the side of peace, etc., but we have not participated in any sanctions against Russia. That has been our stance. But I would say we might have to reconsider that when it comes to any aggression over Taiwan by China.
Just taking the example of the Russia-Ukraine war, having NATO there, hasn't that been help, and wouldn't that then bring about some merits in this proposal of the Japanese PM? So you are saying a collective defense treaty could in fact bring a war forward, right? But would the other argument that a collective defense treaty might prevent escalations, how good does that hold? Especially in the context and the experience of the Russia-Ukraine war that we've just seen?
I don't think it's going to prevent a war then. Like I said, if there is any kind of, you're not going to one day just come up and say we have signed a treaty and we're good to defend each other, because collective defense requires a lot of structures in place, interoperability and things like that. There is none right now. Between the US and Japan, yes, they have US troops in that country. They have US troops in South Korea. But beyond that, there is no interoperability between all the kind of nations that you're talking about, which includes the UK, France. We don't even know if France wants to be part of an Asian NATO, right? Or UK, we don't know. If the US was to form a mutual defense alliance in the region, the UK may join. I don't know, because that's how they think. They are two very close in this country. But we don't know if the US itself wants an Asian NATO. I think there are arguments against it within the US as well. So this proposal is coming from the Japanese PM, who has his fears about the security of his country. How other partners see this is different. India has already said, the foreign minister, Mr. Jaishankar, has already said that we don't see it that way. We don't see our strategic interest being served with a collective security treaty.
So, apart from this statement, has there been any other statement promising any sort of mutual cooperation on military side, short of just signing a mutual defense treaty?
No, I mean, mutual defense is mutual defense. There's nothing either, right? So if you decide there's a mutual defense treaty, there's going to be one. What can happen is, short of that, what can happen is what I just said earlier, right? Where you work out with your partner countries, what are the ways you can, bring pressure on China so that it does not cross the line. And this would be sending out messages that, the countries are not going to be supportive of you. We will use some economic measures. India has huge trade with China to a point where there is some kind of dependency. So we don't know how India would participate, but these conversations have to start. In fact, last year, the Indian Armed Forces have started to study options should there be a war over Taiwan. So we are very concerned about the situation, and we are taking it seriously in terms of how India can contribute towards any kind of deterrence mechanism, or in fact, if the war happens, how India would be part of it. Because certainly there's going to be expectation that India is not going to just stay out of any such war, because ultimately we say we want free and open Indo-Pacific, freedom of navigation, peace, rule of law. We'll have to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to Taiwan.
Right, and with India's growing economic and military power and our aspirations for a rising global profile, right, there would be increasing expectations that we'll play a much more significant role in ensuring security and stability in the Indo-Pacific, right? So, in terms of our regional and global power aspirations, do you think we should at least evaluate this proposal before dismissing it, or is that a no-go from your side?
No, no, I don't think there is anything to consider in this proposal. No.
Okay.
We should build interoperability. I mean, exercise Malabar is happening. I mean, it's going to happen very soon. The Indian Navy just announced, I forget the date, but it's soon enough, where the navies of India, US, Japan, and Australia will participate in another exercise which helps build interoperability. We are increasingly conducting complex exercises, especially at the anti-submarine level. So all that is happening. So this is good, where you have fair bit of understanding of how our armed forces operate, especially our navy, because that's what we want. We want free and open Indo-Pacific. So you can deny China its expansionist goal of kind of usurping the entire South China Sea and call it, basically make it pond. So yeah, that should continue. Beyond that, we are doing Quad. There are a lot of things that are happening under that initiative, which is very comprehensive now, which is good, where it's doing everything from health and maritime domain awareness, a lot of things. But obviously, there'll be a security angle to it, although we deny it. But it's not going to fool China, which already calls the Quad as a quasi NATO or an Asian NATO already, although there is no defense treaty, there's no mutual defense treaty, nothing has that sort. And we have taken the pains to repeatedly say that the Quad is not an Asian NATO, but China does not see it that way. But short of a mutual defense treaty, this is what can be done: strengthen the Quad, strengthen the Malabar exercise, so that you have all the pieces in place where if there is aggression tomorrow by China, there would be some kind of mechanism in place in which cooperation can happen, which does not mean India putting boots on the ground in Japan or Taiwan or South Korea, wherever the aggression is. But short of that, there will be some assistance from India's side.
Great, great. I think we've touched on points and covered this very comprehensively. Thanks, Yusuf, for being here. If you have any parting shots, or else we can wrap it up here.
I think we've covered it all. Parting shot is that India stays out of any Asian NATO. We are not going to get involved in any wars which we should not be in.
Right, right. So basically, you're saying we already have a lot of other avenues of cooperation. We should build on that. We should build on the interoperability aspect, and but not go this last step of signing a mutual defense treaty, which could unnecessarily escalate things and not really have intended consequences.
Exactly. I think it will be detrimental. It might just bring conflict closer and more nearer in our timelines. If people say it might happen somewhere in 2027 or sometime next decade, it might happen tomorrow. If there is talk of an Asian NATO happening tomorrow.
Thanks, Yusuf, for being here and discussing this topic, very important topic, with us.
Thanks, Arindam. Thanks for having me today.
And for our listeners, please stay tuned for the next episode of All Things Policy. Hope you enjoyed this episode too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.